Welcome to the Layman Seminary. Today I'm going to be continuing working on my paper, my Kingdom and Covenant paper for seminary. I haven't touched it in 2 weeks. You can see down here at the bottom, let me get my annotator here to draw it. You can see right here, I haven't touched it since then. So in addition to that, what's been really difficult is my back is hurt again. So I've been off work for a few days. And my concern is I'm probably going to have surgery. And so I need to get this paper knocked out of the way. That the last few days I wasn't able to sit in my chair, but right now I am, at least for a little bit. The doctor told me to rotate. And so, this is just part of the challenges of seminary and ministry is that there's going to be times you don't feel well, but you still got to get the assignment done or the appointment made or the sermon made or whatever it may be. So this brings up the issue that I always make my schedules. Okay. So today is April 21st. That means there's my Larry Helms debate right here. So that means that all this stuff has already transpired. Now, to preserve what I got to do for Kingdom and Covenants, far as the actual lectures and stuff, I'll paste these in. Oh, I'm getting some bogging down here. Let's make sure Logos didn't decide to start indexing right now. No, that's all right. We don't need Super Anna spyware running though. Don't care. I don't want it right now. All right, so let's go ahead and bump the time up here. And we'll just do this. So the 28th, you're supposed to have all that done. So I'm just going to stick it here just so I don't lose anything. Same thing with this one. My goodness, come on. Shouldn't be that difficult, computer. See, the first half of the book, it was covered on the midterm, so I'm good there. As you see, I remember I said that my original plan was, okay, I was working on the paper before the debate. Then I focused totally on the debate. And then I would swing back to the paper. But I didn't touch the paper all this week, okay? And Saturday's tomorrow. So I might as well just wipe out all of this. And so this is the issue that you see that I'm running into. By next Friday, I'm going to have to start shifting into studying for my final. So that means I'm going to have to leave my paper alone while I work on the final. I probably will do both, but I mean, just so if I were to do this extreme focus, that's how it would look. So yeah. And hopefully I can go back to work Monday, but that depends on if I can walk or not. So yeah, and then I have another debate coming up the 20th. That's the 2-on-2, and that debate preparation kicks in right after I turn in my final on my paper. So you see that this is over. This semester is over May 12th, and I'm not taking a class in the summer because they've either offered them or all of them, or I transferred one of my classes from there. So yeah, that's where we're at on that. So I can close this because this is just a reminder that I gotta focus and study hard on this Kingdom paper. I'm not focusing on free grace right now. And that's the challenge. When I want to focus on free grace, I'm studying the Kingdom. And when I want to focus on Kingdom, I'm studying free grace. So last time, in the last video, I moved from my blueprint file, which was just a bunch of jumbled things, kind of. And I made my introduction page. I made a rough table of content page with a comparison of the sample paper, how much the sample paper took up to describe that. And I may come back into that. And I made an outline structure for that. And then the actual paper begins. And so I need to do this. I haven't touched this paper in a long time, so I'm just going to read it for flow and see what's going on here. But let me go back and let's actually look at the outline and let's see if this helps. So I'm going to give an introduction to the topic. I'm going to juxtapose, in other words, set beside or against two kingdoms, okay, the eternal and the temporal. Then we're going to trace the temporal Messianic kingdom or millennial kingdom. I can't remember which. I think it's Messianic, through 9 movements. So the movements are the pink, okay? So I'll just show you these. Movement 1 is from creation to the Tower of Babel. Movement 2 is from the patriarchs until Mount Sinai. Movement 3 is the Mosaic covenant and the Messianic millennial kingdom. I wish I could describe that more in movement language like I did here, but you know, it's whatever. Movement 4, the decline and the departure of the kingdom. Movement 5, from the prophets to the incarnation. Movement 6, the offer of the kingdom. Movement 7, the rejection. Movement 8, the interim age. And then movement 9, the Messianic millennial kingdom fulfilled. So those are the big movements, right? And the fulfilled part is kind of like a culmination or conclusion. So I could probably wrap that into the same section of the paper. So for movement 1, there's a little introduction to that. There's the serpent, temptation, and sin. There's the seed promise and messianic salvation. There's the Babel and the need for theocracy. Then for movement 2, the patriarchs into Sinai, you have a preparatory promise. You have the promise formalized into the Abrahamic covenant, and the promise unfolded from Genesis to Exodus. Movement 3, you have the Mosaic covenant. You have the temporal millennial kingdom connection, and then you have the land covenant, Deuteronomy 30. Movement 4, the decline and departure. So here you have the mention of the Davidic covenant first off, then you have the decline, and then you have the departure, what goes on there. And then movement from the prophets to the incarnation, got the prophecies, right? Then you got the actual new covenant, then you got the incarnation, and then movement 6 is the offer, that it's a genuine offer, and what are the implications of this? Movement 7, the rejection, and just focus on, okay, you got the event, this is temporary rejection. The interim age, you got the mystery, and then you got the church. And then Messianic millennial kingdom fulfillment, you got the culmination, and you got the conditions in the Messianic millennial kingdom. So this is like how everything leads to the Messianic millennial kingdom, and this is like how everything is fulfilled in the Messianic millennial kingdom. Okay? So let's start here. Now we can do our paper split thing, and we can see how well it lines up with our outline. One thing I need to do is I need to disengage that always show ribbon. No, I could turn that off. I don't understand. See what's going on? It won't move from always show ribbon. Maybe if I click show tabs only. Ah. But now will I know where everything is? Let's see. Maybe. I think I might. That gives me a little bit more space. All right. So movement 1 for, well, first off, the introduction to 2 kingdoms juxtaposed. So let's do the introduction. On the basis of the dispensational premillennial faith, one basis for the dispensational premillennial faith is a literal interpretation of the biblical covenants as support for the temporal mediatorial kingdom. Okay, it's mediatorial, not messianic, which has its ultimate fulfillment in the Messianic millennial kingdom. This paper would trace the relationship between the biblical covenants and the temporal mediatorial kingdom through 9 movements: Edenic, Abrahamic, Mosaic, theocratic departure, the Old Testament prophets, Christ's first advent, offer of the kingdom to Israel, the rejection of it, the interim age, and the Messianic millennial kingdom fulfillment. In addition, it integrates other bases for the dispensational premillennial faith, such as hermeneutics, church history, theology within these 9 movements. Now, this is just to get me started. I'm going to change this, okay? But yeah, that's there. So then the two kingdoms juxtapose. Yeah, the eternal universal kingdom, the EUK, is a given. The Lord created everything and is king forever. The EUK is eternal because he is eternal. It is universal, comprehensive in scope because God is omnipresent. He directly rules it. Any conservative theologian does not dispute the scriptural basis for the EUK. In contrast, the temporal Mediterranean kingdom is distorted and disputed by theologians across the spectrum. The TMK is temporal because it relates to the earth and human history and culminates in future Messianic millennial kingdom with a physical locality. The rule of the TMK is mediated indirectly through humans that represent God. This involves God's providential miraculous hand. The TMK also depends on humans to respond. The best way to clarify the nature and purpose of the TMK is a synthetic survey through the 9 movements, tracing the TMK through the 9 movements. Theocratic Mediterranean Kingdom. Movement 1 from creation to Babel. All right, so this is where we are. We should see introduction to serpent, temptation, and sin, the seed promise of Messianic salvation, Babel, and the need for theocracy. Introduction. The TMK has taken many forms throughout human history and begins in Genesis. The EUK creates the TMK time of realm, space, and matter. Even though he delegated to angels to have a role in his plan, angels were never given the earth to rule. Instead, God gave that responsibility to humans to rule over the earth. God placed Adam in the garden to serve, worship, and work in the TMK. When Adam named the animals, he was following the example of God who delegates authority. Serpent, temptation, and sin. The serpent usurped the theocratic structure from the first humans by temptation through an inverted order approach where he, as creature, goes after the queen of the garden instead of the king Adam. Perhaps the serpent heard Adam's first response to seeing the woman, like, whoa, man, which leads him to believe that he could use Adam's intensity for the woman to turn him against God. The serpent may have wanted Adam to exalt the gift from God over God, who gave the gift. That seems to be the test and temptation that arises in every stewardship responsibility at some point. While this may have been the serpent's immediate goal, his goal was to replace, it should be his ultimate goal. Maybe I'll put the word ultimate there. I may change it. His ultimate goal was to replace humanity as the theocratic administrator. Did the serpent, a fallen angel, have the title King of Earth after the fall, or is he a pretender? The attack was also against the created creature distinction. So there's a couple things here that a little disjointed, but it's fine for now. I'll make final decisions on that whenever I get closer to completing a little bit of everything in this paper. Or did the serpent merely disqualify Adam from filling the role perfectly? Satan is the first replacement theologian. What role would the serpent crusher accomplish? Is he the Savior's seed? If not, for the Bible given titles and names of Satan that indicate Satan succeeded in some sense in the fall, there may be a reason to question if the TMK was transferred to him and is under his sway like a mother over her unconscious child. That's just to remind me of a quote that Schaeffer mentions that Andy Woods also mentions. You know, this part about Satan, it might make a good excursus to the paper, which would help me to improve flow. So that may be an option whenever I move things around. Christ must succeed where Adam failed after humanity rebelled. Joined the serpent's counterfeit kingdom darkness. God, so it needs to be man joined. Humanity joined the serpent's counterfeit kingdom of darkness. God revealed his intentions to restore the TMK when he gave the seed promise. The seed promise of Messianic salvation. Genesis, all right, so here we are on that. Genesis 3:15 reveals that someone would fulfill the role of the serpent crusher. That one that defeated the serpent would also be the one to rule the earth. This promise was part of the content fallen humanity had to believe to be positionally saved. For them, positional salvation meant not being under the death penalty, which they most likely understood meant eternal separation from God. When God promised they would have children, this surprised him. In response, Adam called his wife's name Eve, since he believed in God that life would go on after the fall. God then provided them with tunics of skin, implying that he killed the first animal and instituted the first sacrifice. The first parents taught this to their children also, and they were accountable to God for it. From then on, they had to bring an acceptable sacrifice according to their conscience. Sin entered into the picture in Romans 5:12. However, humankind rebelled and joined Satan's kingdom by sinning. This needs to be clarified how this functions here. Consider the implications of these passages. And so that's like, I need to unpack these thoughts here. After the fall, God still made it possible for people to have fellowship with him through instituting a sacrificial system. God was not merely focused on making spiritual salvation possible and restoring a means of fellowship with them. His prophecy of the serpent crusher relates to his plan to deliver the entire earth. This is Messianic salvation, where all of creation is underneath the last Adam in fulfillment of what some would call the Adamic covenant. Later Revelation will tell how the TMK will be reestablished. However, since the author of Genesis is writing to prepare the second generation Israelites for entering the promised land, they know that the primeval history set the stage for God's plan through the patriarchs. What about Cain? And so these are questions that I need to answer and fill in. What about Cain? Satan influenced Cain to murder Abel. God uses religious institutions. It's supposed to be institutions. We'll fix that later. To put encumbrances on Satan. However, Satan is always working behind the scenes. The failure of man is seen in Cain, who takes his life. Lamech made a name for himself. Prophecy for flood. The Noahic covenant became the basis for human government, and believers have the responsibility and opportunity to represent God within their society. So, like I said, really choppy there, right? Okay, so Babel and the need for theocracy. I better put this in italics. All right. The disobedience of humanity at the Tower of Babel is the crucial backdrop for understanding why God's plan is more extensive than spiritual salvation. God needed to call out Abram and create a new nation because of the failure at the Tower of Babel. Babel would not have hindered him from bringing the salvation, since it has been available since the fall. Bringing individual salvation, this should be what it is. Individual positional salvation is really the full term. Since it has been available since the fall, it would not technically hinder the Messiah from coming, right? I mean, the Tower of Babel doesn't actually hinder the Messiah from coming. However, if God is to rule over the physical land through his seed crusher, he must defeat the serpent and retake the land. The story of Abraham in the beginning of this move to redeem the earth through his descendants, through Israel and the Messiah from Judah. The story of Abraham is the beginning of this move to redeem the earth through his descendants, through Israel and the Messiah from Judah. Okay, it's pretty compressed, but I can fix that later. God was not merely making individual salvation possible for people after the fall. Genesis 11, 1 through 9 is a description of why the nations were too corrupt for a theocracy to rise from it. The serpent knew God's intention to restore the TMK, so he sought to replace it with his version. Rather than being monotheistic, his counterfeit by that point was polytheistic. Babel was the gateway to the gods, and the serpent wanted humanity to believe that aligning with the gods he led was the way to becoming a god. Babel results from humanity's rebellion to spread out and fulfill the mandate of the Noahic covenant. Humanity was to bear God's name, not make a name for themselves. They were to depend on the one true God and be interdependent. Instead, the creator-creature distinction is attacked yet again. Okay, so now we're into a movement 2, the patriarchs into Sinai. Okay, let's put these in italics. Maybe, oh, that's not italics. It looks like I don't have these cleared out, like which one I want to put where. So maybe that's something I do in this video. A basis for the premillennial faith is God's promise to Abraham, Genesis 12, that he later formalized and ratified in the Abrahamic covenant, Genesis 15. The Abrahamic promise elaborates on what he revealed in 3:15 after the fall. There was a need for, okay, this definitely goes underneath preparatory promise. So even though it mentions the other stuff, I think I can get by with it. let me see. Let's see. The promise was later formalized. Okay, so let's try this. Let's try cutting this here and putting this underneath this preparatory promise. Then the formalization of the promise would begin here. All right, so now let's see how that flows. Preparatory promise. As basis for the preeminent of faith, a basis for the preeminent of faith is God promised to Abram that he later formalized and ratified in the Abrahamic covenant. The Abrahamic promise elaborates on what was revealed in Genesis 3:15. After the fall, there was a need for the second Adam. This is not a sentence. While some see theocratic administrators in existence throughout human history, the other view is that none existed until Exodus 19. The theocratic kingdom was lost in the fall, but stage setting events occurred before it was restored in the limited sense with Exodus 19. So I'm already talking about Exodus 19 here. So not sure I should be doing that, but maybe we'll move things around. The time between is used as stage setting. Okay, that makes sense. If I'm focusing on the time in between, maybe that'll work. Babel indeed set the stage for the Abrahamic promise. There's a repetition of the phrase for a reason. I don't even know what that's connected to. I have to go look at my footnote. Adam and Abram also could be contrasted because they share this connection. That needs to be clarified a little bit more. The promise had the spirit of royal land grant. The promise had the spirit of a loyal land grant before it was formalized as such. Is that how I talk? I don't usually talk like that. Or as formalized as such. Abraham was already a believer that God gave him the promise. I'm wondering if one of my spell checkers or things changed my words there. I have to evaluate where I actually want to use that language. Promise formalized, 15. This promise was later formalized as a positionally permanent covenant. Covenants regulate fellowship with God because they include the express will of God. The covenant is based on the creator-creature distinction. The land grant is distinct from the suzerain vassal treaty. A suzerain, and so I can put the suzerain vassal stuff underneath the Mosaic covenant. I can move that around. A suzerain gives the royal land grant as a reward for faithful service. God is distinct, but I need to talk about it here because it's very possible that it's still, and even a grant is given in light of that. So maybe I'll just leave it here. God is distinct from any other suzerain, and when he makes a royal land grant for eternity, because it depends on the eternal one to keep it in existence, God gave this promise to a former pagan. Okay, Abram. He expected Abram to understand it as a promise to be fulfilled on earth. Literally. The theocracy was to be through this nation. The Abrahamic covenant goes beyond individual salvation because of its relation to Genesis 3:15 and the call on Abraham, because he was already saved. The basis for the promise is the promise of the seed that will crush the serpent in messianic salvation. Okay, we got some tie-ins here to what we said before. It's a little redundant, but not too much. It feels like it's connecting. The seed motif links it. The promise to Abraham becomes the basis for Christ's base of operations from which he will rule the entire earth. His base will be the land boundaries, and from that place to extend blessing over the entire earth. So this promise is a move of God to prepare Israel for the restoration of a theocracy in a limited sense. His name, okay, so this is talking about the ultimate goal, is a move of God to prepare Israel for a restoration of theocracy in a limited sense. Maybe I'll just add the words until it is present in its fullest sense. And I'll just highlight that to remind me that I need to decide how I want to tie that into future. Okay. His name will already be great. I think that's a reference to the Messiah or Abraham. I don't know. The events of Genesis 3:14 also support that the promises were literal and would be fulfilled. Okay. So this is supposed to be the promise unfolded section. Moses staked out the land. Even in chapter 14, there's a link. The covenant was continually reaffirmed. Okay, this sounds like this needs to be moved to the section about the promise form, the preparatory promise. So let's just work with that for a minute. His aim would be great that support the promise has been fulfilled. Moses staked out the land. Even in chapter 14, there's a link. The covenant is continually reaffirmed to Abraham. It's a promise. I need to change that. Despite perpetual disobedience. Pentecost is the most important part of the Bible. It involves land, seed, and personal blessing. And that's true, but why does he go to 15 on that? Okay. So I'm going to move this underneath the preparatory promise. I'm not sure where I'm going to put it right now, but I'll be working on that in my next sweep through. Okay. This doesn't have a tie-in. This is like the Abrahamic covenant. So for now, I'm gonna try to put this underneath the promise formalized, and we'll see if that works. Okay. Because this is all, yeah, this is all about Genesis 15. Okay. Some of this I may mention in the future part of the paper, but this is all from Genesis, the call on the Abraham until further on. So I could see where this. Okay, now we're getting a little further. Joshua's day. Abraham meeting shit. Abraham was right now. I'll go ahead and include it, but I'll probably will move it again. So this is all Abrahamic. Cut that. Preparatory promise. Promise formalized. I cut it and it goes right where I put it. My bad, guys. Well, I guess that means it flows. All right. So I guess at this point, let's because see, we got the Mosaic covenant stuff is right here. But let's take this out of view mode, and I gotta move this around so I can see. Gotta unsplit my view. This up here. Preparatory promise. Promise formalized. All right. It involves land, seed, and personal blessing. So I need a tie-in because this is talking about the Abrahamic covenant. Um, let's see here. That's the Abraham goes beyond it. Okay. It's still talking about the Abrahamic covenant. I'm just going to type in the Abrahamic covenant and I'll just use AC for now. The AC involves land, seed, and personal blessing. The promise is formalized and ratified as reassurance to Abraham about the promised heir. The Abrahamic covenant is a reward. He has promised a blessing called a reward. This is about the seed and the blessing before the land is mentioned. All right. Land is given to his physical descendants. This is still pretty truncated, but it's all there. The promise of seed would be from Abraham's own body. So it must come through Isaac and Jacob Judah. He also will restore the theocracy. The seed part refers to the promise that Abraham will have a literal offspring, an heir named Isaac, also known as the son of promise. Genesis. Okay. Abram came to understand that there was to be no substitute replacement for the literal seed. This is what the covenant ceremony conveyed. The covenant depended on God alone to keep it in existence. It is why Abram was asleep. The symbols mean the following. Significant, and so these are just little placeholders for me to fill in those blanks. The significance is that God alone walked through the sacrifices. Other examples of ancient Near Eastern include in Jeremiah 34 and then you have the Tardemeh, that's the word for sleep. So this is really like footnote type stuff here. Use Friedenbaum to support deep sleep. Some people have used that. God alone passed through the pieces. The oven and torch represent God, not man. The covenant ceremony confirmed its unconditional nature. Use Ryrie for support of that. Use wood, so that's woods, to support the meaning of the symbols. Second, there was no stated conditions. Third, it's everlasting. Transgenerationally reaffirmed. It was unfulfilled. The lack of stated conditions to Israel's obedience. So this is a reference to Walvoord's categories. And I'm still working on those, plugging those in. The national promise refers to the time of the Messianic kingdom on earth when the whole nation will be believers. So I don't have a good tie in here. There's personal, individual, national promises. So I may have to reiterate that and transition here. Refers to the time of the Messianic kingdom when the whole nation will be believers and the Gentile blessing is ultimately fulfilled. The national promises are found in Genesis 15:18-21. The land boundaries are given in chapters. Okay, same passage. The land is described with other physical lands and the people groups that God will drive out of the promised land. The kingdom is a covenant. The land in 15:18-21 from the constable's notes on numbers. In other words, the size of it, the dimensions. Under Joshua, they only got a sliver from the river Egypt to the Euphrates. Abe gets it in the Messianic kingdom. All right, so this is Abraham. Abraham gets it in the Messianic kingdom because he was promised land between two rivers, but they would not exist in the new heavens and the earth. Now that's a cool. I like that. They flow out of the sea, but there's no sea in the eternal state. So these are things that I could mention later in the paper, but they seem stronger to mention them here. So I don't know. May move those things around. This covenant and prophecies cannot be fulfilled in the eternal state because this is a new earth, not a restored earth. Other differences exist between the Messianic kingdom and the eternal state. So land, Abraham had a part in preparing the sacrifices. So there's a couple Genesis 15 passages here. And so maybe what I want to try to do is I want to try to get all the Genesis, put all the passages in chronological order, and discuss things. So he was asleep with the covenant was made. Abraham understood the promises literally. He walked the physical land with physical people living in it. Some passages refer how to Israel had parts of the promised land in Genesis 15:8, but they did not have all of it as an everlasting passage, as Genesis 17:1-8 states. The eternality of the covenant, the immutability of the covenant cannot rest on man's performance. So this is the stuff from Walvoord that I got to plug in. Referenced by perpetual national disobedience. Other passages support the covenant outworking. Genesis 16 refers to don't have nothing there. Genesis 17 also refers to this covenant made a couple of chapters back. The land is mentioned. Other mentions include, and Abraham passed the necessary tests in Genesis, which allowed God to say that he was proud of him. Basically, it was continuously reaffirmed to Jacob despite his perpetual disobedience. It's continued to the nation of Israel despite her perpetual disobedience. They worship the mother and child, so that's a reference to the Tower of Babel thing. Seems out of place right here, though. The role existed even though it was different from what Moses had. Not sure what that means. Subcovenants could be discussed in several places. Same, that's what I was wrestling with. I made this note to myself because it's like, where do I put this discussion of the subcovenants? The same is true of the land, seed, and blessing. The land, the seed, the blessing. One could be the owner of the land but not enjoy the land. There's a relationship between the Abrahamic covenant and Mosaic covenant. Ironically, Abraham was the first replacement theologian by practice. And I actually said Satan was later on. But in my thinking, I said Abraham years ago. So that's why I got both of them in here. He tried to replace the promised land with his current land. He tried to replace the promise of the seed with Ishmael. And he tried to replace the blessing of God by being disobedient. However, no attempts replaced the Abrahamic covenant. The blessing aspect, the blessing promised to Abraham, is alluded to in the land covenant. The unconditional nature of the Abrahamic covenant is unconditional and be fulfilled by Israel. So that sounds like a title. To clarify what unconditional means, it's helpful to use the term permanent or perpetual, emphasize duration. Also, the term non-dependent or one-sided clarifies that the covenant does not depend on a man for its continued existence. So this looks like language I need to move around to where I'm first talking about the Abrahamic covenant. Okay. Instead, it relies on the faithfulness of God. Man is responsible for keeping the covenant by obeying it to meet the condition for blessing. An individual or generation could miss out on that blessing, but the covenant promised that there will be a remnant. This language is taken from other unconditional covenants that elaborate on the initial promises in the Abrahamic covenant. An earlier mention the Abrahamic covenant explained how an unconditional covenant could have conditional parts and blessings. It is not fulfilled during the time of Joshua or Solomon. Okay, I got a little bit of repetition and redundancy here. The extended context of Joshua 13 is that the land was not conquered. The land gained in the conquest is only a fraction of what was promised. Jerusalem was not conquered on Joshua's day. Solomon's reign extended to the border of Egypt and not the river of Egypt. Not just from Dan to Beersheba, Solomon's reign was only tributary. It was not forever. Israel experienced historical judgment, so we got a lot of stuff about Israel and dates and verses and stuff before I go into the Mosaic. Well, from what I see is I got to do a lot of work still on the Abrahamic section, cleaning it up, getting rid of redundancies, organizing things, putting it in more chronological order before I even get into the Mosaic part. So if we go back up here to look at this, so notice here that right at that time, the last time I was working on the paper, I was basically saying it was about, what's it, 20 minus 5? That's, oh my goodness, 15 pages. But Dane covered that in 5 pages. All right. So that means that there's a lot of things that I can cut down. Now that Dane could have read more or maybe even less, but I'm just trying to cut it down below 15. Okay. And then I'll try to go into the Mosaic covenant. So yeah, that's it for this video. Subscribe if you haven't already. Share this video with others. Hit the bell to get notification. Give us a thumbs up to help with the algorithm purposes. Let's see what else. Most of all, keep this ministry in prayer. In particular, my back and my wife's having teeth problems again. Let's see what else. Oh yeah, and in addition to, if you feel like that you've been blessed by God and you want to donate through the PayPal link that's underneath most videos or in the About section, we now have a monetized channel. So that means that we can get like super chats or stickers or something like that. Still hasn't happened yet, so I don't know how to express that, what that actually is. But as I find out, I'll let y'all know. God bless.